Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
You fucked it up again!
Hello, boils and ghouls. It's your old pal Sick Part 2 here with another episode of Ghouly Gentlemen. I'm joined today by that Matt Killer and Steve Axie.
Hi. I won't kill you, I promise. Unless your name is Matt, and then I'm fucking coming for you.
I'm sharpening his axes.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, anyway. So we're here today. Happy Halloween, folks. We're here for a Halloween special. Always love doing these. We probably could do topic episodes during the month of October, but it's more fun to talk about more horror movies. So getting a topic episode for the holiday always feels nice. And so this month we had a bit of a theme going where we were talking about, like, you know, mothers and daughters mostly. With Steve's case, it was mother and son, because, you know, he can't pass the Bechdel test to save his life. And so it seemed like a good chance to, and like within the context of that, something that kept getting brought up was the relationship and the nature of sex and horror. And so this is going to be much more broadly about the relationship between sex and horror. And I think we just started off with like the subtopic for this episode. So what the fuck's up with monster fucking?
Well, broadly speaking, it can be broken up into a few different categories depending on the relationship to the monster. Now, in this flow chart I have here...
Welcome to Matt's TED Talk.
This is my TED Talk. I will explain monster fucking to everyone. But no, I think it's... I mean, I can explain monster fucking to everyone. I think it's interesting because I do genuinely feel like this idea of, like, having sex with monsters can be broken down into kind of different ways you're viewing the sex with the monster. And it can be something as simple as, like, the Shape of Water or Edward Scissorhands thing, where it's like the monster is just a stand-in for some sort of othering or marginalized body, and therefore the female character, who would also feel somewhat marginalized by virtue of being a woman, is going to identify with that outwardly monstrous thing, even though inside it is, like, kind and sensitive, versus, like, Michael Shannon, who is outwardly attractive but is inwardly a monster, as we see in the film. And I feel like those are the kind of things that just, like, readily make sense to people, and you're just like, oh, okay, no, I get it, that makes sense. Like, yeah, sure, fuck the fish monster, fuck Johnny Depp with scissors for hands, like, sure, why not? I think it's once you get outside of that you start getting into, like, yeah, fuck Pyramid Head. Wait, what? Like, that's when it starts getting weird. And I can definitely explain my perspective on that, but I think that's where you start to get into that realm of, like, what do you mean we're trying to fuck Cthulhu? Like, you know what I mean?
Well, before you, because I want to hear Matt's perspective on fucking Pyramid Head. I signed up for this topic exclusively to hear Matt talking about fucking Pyramid Head, so that's got to happen. But before you start going down that rabbit hole that we all want to hear, real quick, because
Obviously,
you mentioned Edward Scissorhands.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Before you do that, because you mentioned Edward Scissorhands, I do kind of want to mention a little bit of that angle to it, because I do think it's interesting that there's the monster fucking discourse, but then there's also that other phenomenon in horror that I think kind of goes part and parcel with it, which is the final girl. And so many horror movies just kind of coming down to one terrorized lone survivor woman. And I'm sure we're going to have a deeper conversation about that later. But Edward Scissorhands and Batman Returns, both Tim Burton movies, I think are really interesting from this perspective, because so much of that early chunk of Tim Burton's work, before, basically everything up through like Pee-wee's Playhouse to Sleepy Hollow, after which he retired from movie making and didn't do anything for 30 years. That chunk of stuff.
Weird.
That chunk of stuff is really cool because he's a guy that's fascinated by the idea that everything about the artifice of American life, the suburbs, the makeup, the clothes, the all-American quarterback, all of these things are kind of a facade to hide a real ugliness. And then the monster right across the door, that's where the authenticity is. And so you watch something like Batman Returns when Catwoman or Selina comes to her apartment and it's got a dollhouse and it's all pink and her boyfriend breaks up with her on the voicemail and she has messages about getting perfume so that her boss will find her attractive. And then Edward Scissorhands, similarly, you've got that woman, just a door-to-door Avon salesman or a saleswoman going around houses and selling Avon products. But then when the monster side of it sort of enters in and Selina becoming Catwoman or Edward Scissorhands being brought down into the suburbs and that sort of transgressive force shows up inside of this picture of 1960s American suburbia and just starts fucking with it, what you end up realizing is all of this artifice of American life is just another form of suppression. And the reason you want to fuck the Edward Scissorhands, or the reason you want to be dominated by Michelle Pfeiffer in a cat suit, is because there is this transgressive element of this person's genuine. This one person's breaking down these chains you've kind of held yourself in, and that's part of what makes them so exciting and attractive.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve says he will sneak.
Okay.
Steve says he will sneak in his thesis on Batman Returns into this episode.
Hell yeah, man! It's happening every day from now until Christmas.
And I think that's like on Christmas we'll have nothing to talk about because we'll have already reviewed it.
We'll review it again, damn it!
That's, I don't know. I think that, like, because you go back to, when I think about sex and horror, I think about, like, exploitation films in the 70s. I think about, like, Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave. And I think about the idea of, like, okay, we're breaking all these taboos in terms of violence and we're trying to get reactions out of people. So we're going heavy with violence, but we're also going heavy with sex because these are the things that are shocking and these get reactions out of people. And you go back further than that and you think about like pulp horror stories where you've got nubile, attractive, big-titted women getting sacrificed by some cult that, some pulp hero is saving them from. And you go, and in part and parcel with that, you have this idea that the monster is coming for your nubile young women. The monster being a stand-in for some ethnic minority that is disrupting, again, this like civilized life and coming for your woman. And so the woman in the early horror movie has to be young and hot and sexy because we want to defend them from the stand-in for black people. And so I think you can very easily draw a straight line from that to the exploitation genre, to the slasher film where we have to have titties everywhere, and then you get to the reversal of that.
Yeah, god damn it! I just hate when they put titties in my movies. Let me tell you, it just every time I get so riled up and
Stop
angry
with the
about it.
titties.
It's so darn aggravating. It just makes me want to squeeze something, preferably a couple of things.
Yeah, you put your hand on a titty and it's a nice bag of sand, and but yeah, no, and then you have the Edward Scissorhands Shape of Water thing where we're looking back at those original monster is a stand-in for black people and being like, yeah, monster is a stand-in for marginalized people and people who disrupt the heteronormative cis white status quo, and we want to fuck those people. Those people are great. And so I think that it's pretty easy to draw a clear line from it. But I think when you just hit someone with, I want to fuck that monster, I think it just, I don't know that people mentally make that connection right away.
Yeah.
But yeah. No, you're right.
I mean, that's an interesting premise because you're certainly right. You're 100% right. But I don't think that's like the main crux of it anymore. I think that that's where it like started, with like the existence of the fuckable vampires, going all the way back to like Interview with the Vampire or whatever. I think is like the first film or first book / movie that certainly popularized. I won't say created because I think Dracula's got a lot of sex in it, but no one wants to have sex with Dracula in that book. It's just they can't help themselves. Whereas like Interview with the Vampire, the whole point was the vampires were fuckable. And that was like what really popularized it, and like it's still playing to some degree with that the monster is the repressed group, and with Interview with the Vampire it's commenting to one degree or another on homosexuality. But at the same time, I feel like that's where the start of it is, and then like somewhere along the way, the subtext of the monster as a metaphor gets lost, and the like fetishization of the monster just becomes a thing in and of itself. The idea that it's like, oh, it's not just that I feel attraction to XYZ oppressed group. It's, oh, well, I started watching stuff that was, using this as a metaphor for XYZ group, and then I just kind of really like neuron activated myself into being attracted to monsters. Because I've seen like, I saw this post a couple months back that just cracked me up, where it was a girl on Twitter, or at least someone posing as a girl, talking about their like hear me outs, and it was like the xenomorph and predator and like all these other really like bizarre things, and there were replies showing gifs where I'm like, yeah, no, I mean I see the sexual connection to these things. I'm not sure why you're attracted to it, but I see that there is a bridge there. And then the thing that really cracked me up about the post was, and men, when they talk about monster fucking, it's just like some cutesy girl with like bat wings or whatever. Y'all are just cowards.
I mean, that's exactly like when
is gonna fuck the xenomorph. Come on, raise your hands.
I mean, exactly like when women talk about monster fucking, it's like the most eldritch shit you've ever seen, and then men are like, I don't know, Rouge the Bat, but tall and like normal human size. Like, all right, like at that point, that's not even anything. Like.
I do think, though, that, like, to your point, Ian, I think there is something to that, though, like, along gendered lines, kind of like what Matt is saying. Like, if the monster, narratively and symbolically, is a stand-in for these other marginalized entities, then someone who's part of that majority, a man, a white man, a straight white man, their sexual preferences are always going to be the things that's appealed to in broader culture all the time. And so these entities of transgression and weirdness and things that are over the repressed side of that society, they're always going to kind of be in conflict with that impulse. But if you're someone other than that, if you're someone who's a woman or marginalized or a minority of some kind, then those transgressive things, they don't look like a threat to you. They look like something that's in a similar or precarious enough position to you. And so suddenly that becomes a little bit more interesting. Like, men aren't the one who started or had the discourse over the male gaze, right? The male gaze comes from a female writer who wrote about psychoanalysis and Freud in the work of Hitchcock, because she was trying to make this point about how the way male directors see the world that they've created appeals to sort of a cultural identity that's dominant. But the second you aren't part of that dominant ideology, everything that's supposed to look off or bad or scary isn't guaranteed to have that effect on you anymore.
I think it's also like I've seen people even come at it sort of along those same lines, where it's this idea of we are not going to let what our standards of beauty are be dictated by the broader culture. Like, we are not going to let them tell us what is attractive and what is not. And so I think you have, because when it comes to people who are into this idea of like monster fucking or monster fucking erotica or whatever, it's mostly women. And I think it does come from this idea of like the attractive woman is a defined construct in society. And so in order to reclaim some level of power and say like, we will be attracted to what we are going to be attracted to, we are not going to let you dictate that. I think that there's almost an element of like reclamation that happens there. And I think that because I've seen people make that exact argument, like when asked like, what is this thing with you and werewolf, and like that's what they'll say. And I think that that's really interesting, because it plays into this stereotypical idea that like men are visually turned on and women are more complex than that, and that's an oversimplification, but you can kind of see that dynamic playing out in the way that the two genders approach this sort of subsection of erotica or whatever you want to call it.
It's also really apt because so much of the big cultural movie monsters do in some way feel like they're symbolic for a crisis in masculinity or some kind of conversation about masculinity and femininity. Like you look at Leatherface, right? Leatherface, he's the homemaker. He puts on makeup. He gets yelled at and abused by the other people in the house. You look at the Xenomorph, and it is basically just one big penis monster. Prometheus literally has an abortion machine. Like, there are these things about these horror monsters, or these monsters that people want to fuck, that are designed by male artists to appeal to a certain kind of fear about a man's masculinity. But if you're not the person that has that insecurity, then the monster doesn't look like it's emasculating you. It looks instead like the kind of thing that has a perspective similar enough to yours, where you too are seeing the things about the masculine identity that are ripe for deconstruction.
How would you think that would apply to Predator in particular? Because that's one I've heard a couple times, and that's always been... Like, a lot of the other ones I can kind of, at least get conceptually, but, like, Predator in particular, given that it is such a, like, male fantasy, God, list of, like, top ways to die, being hunted to death, would just fucking rock.
I want to be hunted by a predator.
It was funny because I was having this conversation earlier today with someone where it was like, it's just that male fantasy of when you see like you're on the street and you see like undisturbed pure white snow, you just want to like bleed out right there, like it's just how you want to go. So like. But I've heard, like I think I mentioned, I don't remember if it was on call, if it was on the episode or on call, but we had a girl at work, and I overheard her one day talking about the movie Predators, and I was like, oh man, I fucking love that movie, it's one of my favorites. She's like, yeah, and I'm like trying to talk with her about it, and she just kind of like trails off. I'm like, do you not really like Predators? She goes, I do, it's just, I don't really care about the movies, I just really want to fuck one. It's like, that was the first time I encountered it, and I was like, whoa, what? That one just shocked me, and so, like, I asked her to describe it, she's like, well, they're just so big and, like, muscular, and, like, they're wearing, like, fishnets and stuff, like, okay, I guess, but, I don't know, it's interesting to talk about, within the context of what you were just saying, Steve, because I don't think... Like, the Predator, I guess, is there to prove that it is the manliest. Is it just, do you think it's like the neuron activated of, well, it beat up the other manly guys, so it's the most manly, and that's the, put a baby in me kind of perspective?
Okay, so, like, I think... Oh, no, go ahead, Steve. Didn't mean to cut you off.
I have a theory, but Matt, if you want to take it, I can go after.
Well, I think it's... So, what you were talking about, how, like, we can go on this long-ass diatribe about how, like, the monster is the othered individual that you find kinship with and therefore want to fuck. But you're right, there is a level to it of it's just I cannot say that word. It's just a fetish.
Fetishization.
Yeah, I'm not fucking say that word. It's just at some point it just becomes a fetish. It is just like, here are the elements of masculinity that we have sort of sold as being attractive. This like domineering, super strong, super powerful, and now we're just dialing it up to that like 11. We're dialing it up to the realm of, we're now outside of what's real, and we're now going into the realm of fantasy. And I think for most people, fucking monsters is exactly that. It's a fantasy in the same way that like CNC is a fantasy, or sorry, let me tell on myself a little bit. Consensual non-consent is a fantasy in the same way that fucking a monster is a fantasy, in the same way that it becomes a kink, it becomes a fetish. And it's like, I don't know that anyone in a real life situation with a real predator would want to fuck one, but like in this imaginary space where we can explore these really dark, fucked up, taboo dynamics between the people involved in the sex, it suddenly becomes very erotic because you're able to just explore the pure like physicalness of that without having to deal with any of the ramifications that come along with it. I think in a lot of ways, these monsters are just like an advanced, more intense version of like a Mr. Darcy Byronic hero type. Like, it's just like, take that sort of character archetype and just dial it up to the point where it's literally a monster. Not just like a dude who's a dick, but like literally a fucking monster. But that monster wants you. And it's like, oh, that's hot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I mean, it is definitely 100% that. And I think on like a really simple level, you ask somebody, like you go to a convention and you're like, hey, do you want to fuck a predator? And their answer is going to be like, yes, that looks awesome. But if we're trailing back to like that more symbolic notion of what the monsters are supposed to represent, I think the predator fits kind of perfectly in that mix of like the leather faces and the aliens and all that stuff, because it's also kind of emasculating the main character and revealing a problem in that masculinity. Because the original Predator movie is all about that. It's all about manly men being manly and shaking hands and showing off their biceps and being the coolest military frat bros ever, who all go out like bitches when the real man shows up. And that sort of notion of all of these guys are constantly outwardly performing for the audience the degree to which they are manly men, and then getting beaten by a thing that's basically invisible most of the movie, does kind of form that emasculating thread. But then at the same time, like Matt was saying, there is that sort of element of like, this danger or this threat or this thing that puts the fear into the male character isn't necessarily doing the same thing to someone who isn't that target audience. And so instead, they're seeing this thing enter into the screen and causing terror to the male characters in a way that's not compatible with them. And instead, they're seeing this thing of like this sort of peak physical form that doesn't have those insecurities, that isn't performing its masculinity for you. It's just being. It just is the thing. And in that way, that sort of confidence is kind of attractive. It's kind of like when we talked about Yuri on Ice, right? Like we talked about like
neuron
this
activated. What?
Right. It's like when we talked about Yuri on Ice. Like there's that thread of like, is it okay that like the student and the teacher have like this will they won't they chemistry to them? And like morally in real life, probably not. But the power dynamic that's there, this notion that this thing is dangerous and weird and kind of scary and not plagued by the typical insecurities you see in everyday life, that makes it sort of inherently attractive. Like, look, no one wants to be scratched on by weirdly bent paper clips and nail files from Michelle Pfeiffer and Catwoman. That does not look comfortable. But you get Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman doing that, and you get that personality of like this uber confidence, this person that isn't going to perform the norms of the society they're implanted onto. This person that makes the notion of that relationship really dangerous, but also coincidentally makes you feel really alive in it. That fear is very similar to that attraction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think you also got a really good point about the lack of performativeness, because like you think about that like whole viral question from a couple months ago that was like, would you rather be stuck in the woods with like a bear or a human, or like a human guy? And it's like the monster is not a human dude, and so you get all of these hot masculine features that you can fuck, but without the inherent strings that come attached with sleeping with a man in the United States in the year of our Lord 2025, who could have, and I don't mean that as just like a derogatory, all men suck, even if they do. I just mean that in the sense that like you don't know, like,
Yeah.
you don't know that dude's life. You don't know what ulterior motives he could have. You don't know like what he could try to, manipulate. You don't like whereas this thing, it's comes across as this much more primal and instinctive thing. So you literally just get to have that without all of this like societal and drama and strings and like all this shit that could come with like what a man coming into your life could potentially do. You just get the fantasy without any of the like bullshit attached to it that comes from men who are like insecure or performing masculinity or all this stuff. You just get the thing, you get to cut to the chase, basically.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's like, why do we watch porn, right? It's because at the end of the day, it creates a certain kind of arousal, and you're not in for it for like good acting or the plot or the characters' relationships. You're in it because in there, you're seeing something that's 100% honest about what it is, which is this visual of people fucking will make you want to fuck. And that sort of authenticity, as depressing as it sounds, it's really hard to find in most everyday life at this point when you're just dominated by AI slop all over the place.
Exactly. And then there's the I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, you're good. Well, why don't you make your point, because I'm about to transition us to a related but different topic. So if you want to jump in real quick with one last thought on this, because I think we went pretty hard on the monster fucking.
I think some people just want a weird alien monster dick inside them because it's big and feels good.
That I think is also a big part of it. Is just weird.
Like there's a whole fucking there's probably more than one, but there's like a whole company that just makes monster dildos for people because that's just a thing. Anyways, that's honestly the last point I had. I feel like we did actually cover that pretty well.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to go, because what we've been talking about is not universally. Obviously, there's like, other groups of men, like gay men or whatever, that might indulge in this as well. But I feel like monster fucking is primarily a female induced element of blending sex and horror. So I want to go over to like more of something that I see as much more particularly male dominated when it comes to the relationship between sex and horror, and I think does, maybe in a very dark way, bleed into that fantasy element, which is the relationship between extreme violence and sex that we see expressed in a lot of horror. Steve, you mentioned Texas Chainsaw Massacre earlier, and I remember seeing like some discourse around one of the images from that where they're taking the chainsaw and like turning it on right at a woman's crotch and stuff. And there's just, I think, a lot of, especially in the slasher era, there's just a lot of like incredible acts of violence towards women. Freddy Krueger, the pedophile monster that comes in and terrorizes teenagers and little girls, and like all of his dynamic with Nancy throughout those films is just incredibly sexually coded, and is enacting sexual violence towards her. There's the towards her and the other like female characters and protagonists throughout the films. There's the really famous like shot of she answers the phone and then like Freddy sticks his tongue through the phone and like tries to get a kiss that way and stuff. So What do you think that it is? Just that, again, like from the male perspective, kind of leaning into those really dark fantasy elements, or do you think that it's trying to actually say something with that, or is it like more of a case by case?
I think in general that there's definitely something being said there. And there's a book from the 90s that's really famous for going into a lot of this stuff, where a lot of the terminology for how we talk about slashers academically comes from. But Carol Clover's got this book called Men, Women, and Chainsaws, and it's all about the slasher and the final girl and the sexual and gender dynamics of that. Because for a long time, when those movies were coming out, like the critical evaluation that there's a lot of sexual violence here that seems targeted at women, that's not a new thing. That was there from day one. And Claire Clover's book does a really good job of historicizing how that reaction was happening to each of these movies and the genre as a whole and how it was taking shape. But her sort of big central argument is you can't really talk about these images of sexual violence happening from the monster in the slasher without also talking about the fact that all of them rest on these really predictable moments of overcoming or escaping that monster. And so if the monster is a big metaphor for sexual violence, then the movies are always at tension with how much of that violence it can do and what the capability is of that final character to ever escape. Halloween, obviously, best slasher movie of all time. I love Halloween; it's great. But
Allegedly.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, I don't know
Halloween,
about that.
it's the best. It's the best, but that's okay. We don't have to argue that. Halloween is really good about this because the first thing that Michael does is he kills his sister, and his sister was having sex upstairs. And so he walks into her room. The camera is first person. He's got his little goofy clown costume mask on. So you got these little eye slits, and he's looking at his sister, and she's naked, and then he starts stabbing her. And from there, a lot of the violence that Michael enacts throughout that movie, it either happens to someone who's about to go have sex, or after someone just had sex, or someone that thinks that he's someone else and is trying to flirt with him. In Halloween 2, there's a scene where there's a woman in a hot tub and he puts his hand on her shoulder and she starts kissing the hand before she realizes it's Michael. And so he's always doing these really impersonal, really off-putting non-responsiveness to consensual sex before he then immediately returns that with some sort of violence. And Laurie famously never has sex in that movie, but she wants to. She is a teenage girl and she wants to have a boyfriend, and the things just kind of don't work out for her for one reason or another, and she's still, at the end of the day, chased by Michael. And so a lot of people read a lot of that scene as the slashers are puritanical about the way they deal with sex. Because if you don't have sex, then you live. But that's not really how Halloween functions, because Michael is indiscriminate in the violence he metes out. But the fact that his violence is always predominantly towards women and babysitters, there is this larger notion that all of the violence he enacts on women is sexual in nature because he's primarily targeting women that are just about to have sex. And so Laurie, at the end of the day, when she's escaping from him, when she's protecting the kids, when Loomis shoots him and he disappears and goes on to chase her for 12 more movies, all of that stuff is part of this larger tension in that series and in slashers in general of the sexual violence and the violence inherent to sex is just a matter-of-fact reality that all of the characters have to inhabit. And so when those things are happening, they're not being puritanical about the morals of that sexuality. What they're saying in one argument is anyone that's engaging with this has to come away with some separation or some resistance. Laurie has to find a way to escape that cycle of violence. The Nancy, I think is her name in Friday the 13th, or not Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, has to find a way to escape the child molester Freddy. The final girl in a lot of these classic slasher is always exposed to the violence of the world in one shape or form, but her path her path out of it is the thing that gets complicated. And whether or not she's able to escape it, whether or not you're able to escape it without consequence, a lot of it really just kind of comes down to, are these kinds of monsters individual isolated cases, or are they larger systemic failings, like in the case of Michael, who escaped an institution, or Freddy, who was a child molester, and then their parents essentially fucked them over by murdering him instead of bringing him to justice, and things like that, where the monsters are representative of larger social norms that the final girl has to escape.
Or Jason, who was let to drown because you don't feel like mentioning the actual best slasher movie, the first Friday the 13th.
I don't really
But whatever.
like any of the Friday movies, to be honest with you.
Damn.
They're not the best.
Well, Halloween 1 is overrated. Fuck you. No,
Oh, here we go.
Next year we can do one of the Friday movies, and you can maybe sway me.
I won't be able to. I have
I really like Ice Cube, so that
I have no argument. But let's continue.
No one laughed at my joke, and I was sad. That was a good joke. I know someone watching this is black and laughed at that joke, so thank you for that person alone. So no, I mean you're definitely right. Jason is like it's a meme at this point that Jason is just like a Christian purity bro who's just like, no, you can't have sex until marriage, kind of thing. So there is an interesting element to those big slashers, and to a lesser extent Ghostface, but a lot of it's still there. I really like the joke in the first Scary Movie that the reason that he started killing people is because his girlfriend didn't want to have sex with him, and it made him crazy and gay. And then Ray's like, oh, I'm not gay.
That movie is so good. I unironically love that movie.
The first two are really good. It's after that they go downhill. Take my strong hand.
To this day, it's got the funniest ending of all time, and I don't even want to spoil it.
Right. But it is interesting that like that slasher era has just a lot of this sexual violence directed at women. And it they came out in the 80s and 90s when a lot of the the victories of liberation had kind of been solidified and weren't they were obviously challenged, but they weren't seriously challenged yet because a lot of the people that fought for them were still alive. And so you start to see like these victories of liberation, and then the horror movies kind of go to these extreme reactionary acts of violence and aggression toward women. So I think that's like just an interesting dynamic, and I can't necessarily blame someone though for interpreting that as kind of living out the fantasy of wanting to have ownership and control of women and getting to just do whatever the fuck you want to them and torture them, blah 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 blah. But I don't know if that's necessarily exactly what's going on, or if some of the messaging is getting lost in the the visceral nature of the imagery being shown.
I don't know. I was thinking about. I was rewatching The Cabin in the Woods the other day, and I was thinking about this idea of sex in slasher and horror movies, and like women being conceivably punished for sexual behavior as like a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point, where it's like, okay, you open the first act, you have these characters who are clearly like three-dimensional people, and then the narrative literally forces them into being stereotypes because they have to fit the mold of what the old ones are wanting to see. So you're essentially looking at the old ones as the horror film audience and saying that we could have more three-dimensional female characters in our horror. We could move past this, but the audience that is here to watch these things will turn against us if we do that. So it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy where we introduce this idea of you have a slasher or a horror movie, there needs to be titties, and then the titties need to get murdered. And suddenly, if we try to move beyond that, you have a bunch of people going like, well, where's the titties and the murder? And so it just becomes this issue where it's like, maybe we don't need to do it, and maybe we're just doing it to do it at this point, and we're not thinking about the ramifications. It's why, in some ways, as exploitative as they are, I do kind of like those older, like, 70s exploitation, like rape revenge stories, because at least then we're dropping all the pretense. At least then we're just saying it's intentional and we're doing it for a reason, and we're not pretending that we're doing something different. So when I watch I Spit on Your Grave, I'm just like, I'm kind of fucking with what this movie's doing, because it's at least doing it to do it. It's not just there because it's there and we expect it to be there. And it's not really thinking about why it's there.
Terrifier is a great example of what you're saying, I think, because I don't understand the Terrifier movies. I don't understand why they're as popular as they are. I don't know why everyone turns out for them. I don't know what's revolutionary about them. They're kind of just like shitty splatter horror movies, but whatever. There are things about the first one that I kind of dig, but it's sort of half a movie. And then you watch the second one, and it's entirely too long. And then you get a third one that's got some interesting ideas, but again is entirely too long. But all that to say, when like you said, when you go back and you watch older exploitation films, like Last House on the Left or I Spit on Your Grave, but like also those early slashers, Texas Chainsaw or Black Christmas or Halloween or anything like that, the sexual violence that's there, the sort of exploitative nature that's there, there's a perspective behind it. There's this consistent thing happening throughout the filmmaking of this person is just trying to do this premise and seeing what that can reveal as it goes on. And sometimes it works better than other times. When it comes to Terrifier is this weird slasher that wants to have its cake and eat it too, because it wants to have a strong, kick-ass hot girl that beats the monster, but it also wants to titillate you with lots of gore and guts and sex. And part of the reason the other slashers in the earlier days worked was when the violence was happening, at least for the good ones, they were still fully realized characters. They were still people that you kind of cared about, and violence was not meant to be a spectacle as much as it was meant to be scary. And as time goes on, that scariness goes away and becomes nothing but spectacle. And then you just kind of have to appreciate them as, well, it was cool seeing that guy's guts get ripped out because it's a cool visual. As sensibilities change, you kind of can't do that in the same way anymore. And then the Terrifier films come along, and they are in that model of like exploitative messes of like a girl is tied up upside down and she's down to just her underwear, and Art the Clown saws her in half from the vagina down. And it's just like, what in the world am I watching? And then Terrifier 2, really similar thing where like he's just mutilating this girl, goes down to the kitchen, grabs a big box of salt, starts rubbing the salt in the wound, and that's not even the worst part because the mom sees the deformed, mutilated body, and just when you think it's bad enough, she breathes a little bit and you realize she's still alive through all that horrible mutilation. The Terrifier movies are really bad about this inconsistency where they want you to revel in how violent and disgusting they are because they're glorified, and that's part of the charm. But then they're also trying to integrate it with this lore-heavy story about Art being some kind of demon or whatever, and having this quote-unquote strong female character that's going to stand up to him and beat him with his own phallic symbol in the shape of a sword because she's dressed like an angel and all this stuff. Like, there is this real clear contradiction in those movies that I don't think they've ever really been able to square of like, look, are you trying to make a movie with a female character dealing with the trauma of surviving a slasher, or are you just trying to traumatize your characters? Neither of those are bad options, but you kind of have to pick one.
I'm at the point with those movies where I'm just like, I feel like they're just designed to be cool production set pieces, to be like, look at how
Mhm.
good we are at doing this. And I'm like, yeah, you are. And it's entertaining to watch in the moment, but I feel like there's a reason that, as much as I do enjoy the first one, and I think that scene is meant to, in the second one, the violence and gore over the top becomes like blackly comedic, and I think
Yeah.
that can work. But I think there's a reason that those don't like linger in my mind the way that I would think that they would, and I think that that's exactly it, is that they're almost in conflict with themselves, because again, I think it goes back to exactly that these are things that I don't think are being done with clear intention. They're being done because these are horror movie junkies and they're making like the ultimate horror slasher movie, and so these things have to be there.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, go
I
ahead.
want to talk about American Psycho. More particularly because we've been very movie focused with this, and movies I think are like the kind of the biggest cultural form of art. Just like everyone watches movies to some extent, so I think they're kind of the natural place to go to. And obviously, American Psycho has a film adaptation and just a wonderful direct to DVD sequel that everybody should spend their time watching. And
Don't tempt
Thank you,
me.
Steve.
Don't
response.
tempt me. I'll watch it. Damn it.
Oh, don't! Hey, it's got a fantastic
It's
cast.
got-
It's got William Shatner.
it's got Mila Kunis.
Mila Kunis.
Oh my God!
It's
Stop!
a
You've
fantastic
you've
film.
already sold it. I'm already loading it up. Continue.
Yeah. But anyway, like I want to talk more about the book because as you were mentioning the Terrifier, I was reminded of Why I Will Never Eat Spray Cheese Again because of Patrick Bateman in the book, and just the incredible amount of detail that Bret Easton Elias puts into that book. Because you know, if you watch the movie, Christian Bale goes through like his whole fucking morning routine and like his skincare, and it's like, I use an aftershave that doesn't have any or very little alcohol because alcohol ages the skin. And he's like goes into so much detail. And the thing is, the detail he goes into in his morning routine in the book is significantly longer than that. And that's the same level of detail he puts into everything, especially when he talks about these horrific acts of violence that he is inflicting upon women, and the just absolutely deranged, crazy shit that he comes up with. Of like, I really do begin to wonder, you know, when like a writer does a certain thing in a book, and you've always got that like, where do you get your ideas? Like most of the time it's a silly fucking question, but with horror movies, legitimately, like, where did you think of this of all things? Where did you think of saving a rat that came out of his toilet and then you know, putting like nailing a woman down to the floor and then spraying spray cheese up her vagina and putting the rat in a tube and shoving it in her vagina and then like forcing the rat to crawl its way out of her belly? Where did this idea come from? Because that's like seared into my brain forever. And it is just like an inherently sexual act of violence, as almost all of Bateman's murders are, because of this like inherent fear of being perceived as homosexual that exists in that book and that character, and just as well as the commentary on the psychopathic nature of the Wall Street businessman. I think Bret Easton Elias certainly wasn't the first person to make that connection, but damn did he make it well. Because it was, you know, that book came out in the early 90s, I want to say, and so it's right after the heyday of when it's set in the 80s, and it's just, it's building on a lot of these ideas that would get explored much further, much later, but it very like pioneering and making these connections of just sociopathy and connecting it to the like the growing satanic panic and like the serial killer infatuation, and just kind of taking a lot of those attitudes of late 80s, early 90s America and kind of blending them all up into one just absolutely monstrous character. And then at the end, he just, nothing bad happens to him because nothing bad ever happens to someone in this social class.
Mhm.
They never have to face any consequences for their actions. They can just do these horrendous acts of murder. And like what's really impressive about it is Patrick Bateman arguably isn't even the worst person in his friend group. There's a prolonged scene in the book where there's a homeless woman begging for money, and I believe it's Van Patten, his friend, that you see periodically throughout the movie, but he's not really important. But Van Patten like holds out $100 bill in front of her, and then as she goes to reach for it, he lights it on fire, and then just like kicks the shit out of her, and gets in a cab, and they just drive off.
Mhm.
And it's like just again horrendous acts of violence against women in particular. That stand out. And so just the level of detail that book goes into is just staggering. It makes it really fucking hard read.
Interesting.
I know you're talking
I've
about
never read the book.
Cautious recommendation. It's a really well written book, but it's you really got to be like prepped going into it because it is like it'll make you queasy if you have too active an imagination.
To your point about Patrick not even being the worst person in the friend group, I know you're talking about the book, but the thing that always stays with me is the scene in the movie where he's got the body in that big duffel bag of sorts, and he's dragging it across the street in the middle of the night, and he's trying to load it into something, and then these two people he knows just walks by and starts talking to him, and he's all nervous and squeamish, and he's trying to like not mention that he just killed a dude and that the body is in the bag, and he's a really bad liar and all that. And then the people he's talking to, they just don't even care. They don't care one iota. And the last line of the movie is he says this confession's meant nothing, and it's exactly like you said. It's because he's living this life of hedonism and violence and specifically sexual violence, but as much as he's at odds with himself about the limits of what he can do to people before not being able to get away with it, what he doesn't realize is that at the end of the day, he's in a world where all of the things that allow him to do this in the first place are so normalized that he's just a drop in the bucket. So it doesn't matter whether anyone finds out what he does or doesn't do. It doesn't matter how far he goes, because at the end of the day, it's all just part of this rot of a society that he's in anyway. It's all essentially meaningless.
Male.
Just had to kill a lot of people.
If you're talking about books, I recently reread Frankenstein because the new movie was coming out, and I was watching all the movies, and I figured, oh, go ahead and read the book. And I read the original 1818 version because I like some of the details about Victor's family a little bit more in that one compared to the other version. But I was reading that.
There's another version?
There's two, yeah. There's
I didn't know this.
yeah, no. So there's two versions of Frankenstein for people who don't know. Originally, Frankenstein was published in 1818 by Mary Shelley, but the original version that came out in 1818 was published anonymously, and it had a foreword by her husband, Percy Shelley. Later, when it got reprinted in the 1830s, several sections of it were rewritten. A lot of lines were changed, some character details were changed. It's still like functionally a very similar story, but there's a lot of character stuff that's different. And that one did actually have Mary Shelley's names attached. And every version of Frankenstein that you buy in stores now is that later 1830 version, unless you specifically buy one that says it's the 1818 version.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Never knew that.
It's really cool. I mean, one detail that seems insignificant but does sort of feel different when you're reading it is the moment in the book where Victor's gone back to his family after creating the monster and after his little brother has been killed, and he knows that it was the monster who does it. In the version that most people read, he goes to the mountains by himself to kind of mull over the tragedy, and that's when he meets the monster. In the original 1818 version, his whole family actually goes with him. So that part of it is quite a bit different. But anyway, the reason I bring that up is I was rereading Frankenstein, and I was thinking about all the interesting stuff about morality, and God, and the hubris, and Prometheus, and all that stuff. And a thought that never crossed my mind until I read someone write an essay about it was the sort of deep, profound horror of Frankenstein is all in the background of this is a guy who created life without having to be a woman and be pregnant. That he bypassed all of the sort of natural processes of what it's like to be a woman in order to create this monster, and now they're both unhappy, imperfect beings. And so many of the Frankenstein adaptations actually use the death of Victor's mother as the catalyst for why he decides he wants to conquer death in the first place. But that's not in the book. In the book, his mother dies when he's young of scarlet fever. And then throughout the book, the things that the monster does, he kills Elizabeth. He kills Justine, the caretaker of the house. He kills Victor's little brother, William. All of these crimes that he's committing, they're predominantly towards women. And Victor's greatest crime on that reading of the novel is that he bypassed the thing that under a sort of gender binary that a woman is the only thing a woman could do, which is creating life. And by doing that thing so unnaturally, he's created this force that doesn't have a place to exist in the world. And the way it expresses its ability to not exist is to, number one, demand a woman so that he could have someone to be a companion with, but in this reading in a more sexual way, and then just commit violence on other women, which is really interesting. It's not a thing that I thought of, but I thought it's a cool read that I feel like isn't in very many movie versions of it. I guess probably because there are not very many movie versions directed by women.
You just reminded me of a post I saw the other day related to Frankenstein. I wanted to read it real quick. At one point in Frankenstein, you're reading the story of a Turkish girl told to a Frenchman, overheard by the monster, who's narrating it afterwards to Victor, who's recounting it to an English sea captain, who's writing it down in a letter to his sister.
Dude, there are so many detours in that book where someone is telling a story about a story to another person and it just keeps going. It's so wild. I love those books.
Christopher Nolan could never.
Frankenstein.
There we go. I need Christopher Nolan's Frankenstein or Dracula. That'd go hard. After he's done with the Odyssey, that's going to be his next one.
Fun fact. When Christopher Nolan was directing the latest adaptation of Frankenstein, he actually did take a bunch of corpses, stitch them together, and bring them to life to play the monster.
Yeah, it sounds like something Christopher Nolan would do.
Anyway,
it's just at a certain point, Christopher Nolan's just making documentary adaptations of like these absolute monstrosities. That'd be such a good idea for like a Halloween sketch. God damn it, Steve!
Oh man, it would have been so good.
All right. No, but like to your point about the creating life thing, that is actually one of my favorite things about Frankenstein, and it's like it's such an obvious thing that it amazes me people miss it. And I think this is like completely a separate issue, but there's almost like that like faux intellectualism that like person that just really likes to correct people but doesn't actually take into consideration anything that they're fucking saying, but they just want to be right. So like you always have this of, oh, what's your favorite movie monster? Oh, well, I like Frankenstein. Actually, it's Frankenstein's monster. Actually, the whole fucking metaphor of the book and the monster is that it's his son, so he's still Frankenstein, you piece of shit, stupid fuck. People... Literally, the first film adaptation of Frankenstein, it ends with Victor's father giving cheers and saying a son to the house of Frankenstein. Like, I don't know how much clearer they could have been with this goddamn narrative point. But fuck.
Wait. Before you continue on that point, I do have one other side note that goes in line with this. I made the mistake of logging into Goodreads, and don't do that. Goodreads is Rotten Tomatoes for book people, and it's just as bad. And there's a whole bunch of reviews of Frankenstein, and a common thread in the reviews on Goodreads that I found was there's a bunch of people that seem to be under the impression that the monster's name in the book is Adam, and it's not. There is one line in the book when he meets his creator where he compares his creator to God and compares himself to the biblical Adam because he thinks he's entitled to the kingdom of God. So he says, I am your Adam. And people seem to think that means his name is Adam.
LOL.
It's kind of insane. So continue. But yeah, that's part of the faux intellectualism. Like, no. Read the lines. That is not his name.
When I did read Frankenstein, it really made me want to go back and try Paradise Lost again. I think that's just going to be a book that's like forever out of my level of comprehension.
So good. I love Paradise Lost.
I've tried so many times. I've tried at least 5 times since fucking middle school to get through Paradise Lost. I can never like manage to crack it. It just does not compute in my brain. My brain just immediately turns off and can't actually take in any of what the fuck it's saying. I need a good film adaptation of Paradise Lost, please. I need a stage play of Paradise Lost to try to take some of the pressure off my brain.
I mean, you've got Prometheus and you've got Alien Covenant, and together there's a pretty good God and the devil metaphor in there for Paradise Lost worthy.
Yeah, maybe. But like, I know in Frankenstein he talks about like listening to Paradise Lost, being read, and he's like, and I saw myself in Lucifer.
Yep.
Oh my god, that's so fucking cool.
No, it's great because he goes from his creator being like, "You're God and I'm Adam. I deserve the of Eden," to then being like, "I guess it's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven," and going against his master. It's great. It's so good.
Yeah, and that's why he starts like killing and fucking murdering left, right, and center. And there's just the tragedy of everything that gets at the end.
He only kills 3 people, I think.
Only 3.
He only kills 3. That's yeah, I mean, like, he doesn't go on a rampage. He only kills 3 people, I think. 4 if you count Justine, but he didn't really kill Justine. He just kind of framed her, and then she ended up dying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right. But he's still just like so tragically lost because he frames himself as if he's gonna be, he'll be better than man, and then he just like ends up copying all the worst aspects of his creator, and so they go across the world chasing after each other, which is good. I like the stage play they did with Benedict Cumberbatch a couple years back.
Yeah, that's really good.
That was almost a 1-to-1 adaptation, or as much as you could do in a stage play. So anyway, back to the topic of sex and horror. Do you guys have like a favorite instance of like a blending of these two things?
Of what, sex and horror?
Yeah, like just a time where it just like really hit you, or you just like really enjoy the depiction that is put on screen for it, or what have you.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't have to be on screen, it could be in book or something.
Yes, all right, everyone shut up. I'm going to talk about Haunting Ground, the survival horror game for the PS2 released by Capcom in the early 2000s. So,
let's go.
People like to say that Silent Hill 3 is super psychosexual, and Heather is exploring like these concepts of female fears and forced pregnancy, and they're all fucking wrong. It's Haunting Ground that really gets it. Haunting Ground is one of my favorite survival horror games because it's all like about psychosexual horror. So you have this character who Fiona, who is kidnapped by an insane alchemist, and she has this like life essence inside of her, and he wants to use that so he can continue his immortality. To the point where like one of the main bad guys is like she's literally got Ray's backstory where this one alchemist made a clone of himself, and then that clone went off and ran away and had a child with another unrelated woman, and that child is Fiona. And then the other clone is this other fucked up dude who kidnaps Fiona, and that other clone, who is biologically basically her uncle, is at one point in the game screaming, literally he screams, "Let me into your womb," because he's trying to impregnate her, and then through that impregnation, he will then have a more perfect, less damaged clone of himself, because he views cloning as a form of immortality. And so it's this very obvious metaphor for the way that men are viewing women and the access to women's bodies and the forced reproduction as a way to extend their own legacy and their own life. And so you have these fears being like literalized and taken to this nth degree, and the entire gameplay of Haunting Ground is you're being chased around this castle by stalker enemies that you cannot kill them permanently until you reach a certain point in the story. They are just chasing after you, and you all you can do is run and hide. So it's this masterful, it's also an old school survival horror game, so it uses fixed camera angles that are often voyeuristic. So it's this beautiful use of gameplay and story to make you actually feel what it would be like to be like a vulnerable, preyed upon, stalked woman who is being chased by people who only see her as a body, who specifically see her as a body to be used for reproduction purposes. And Fiona has like an extremely gorgeous figure, and she's even got a little bit of jiggle physics to her, because it's all designed to like emphasize this idea of sexual horror, that she is being forced into the role of a sex object by the people who are trying to use her for that, and you are basically desperately trying to escape that situation, and your only ally is the goodest dog, Huey, who is not part of this because he is just an animal. Like, he doesn't have these like ideas of viewing people as tools or as bodies. He just is loyal to you because you showed him kindness, and so now he is going to help you out of this situation. And it is maybe my favorite depiction of psychosexual horror. And I think that's it. That's all I really have to say about it. I just wanted to talk about it because more people need to play Haunting Ground, but emulate it. Don't pay $500 for a physical copy. But
wait, what?
It's an extremely rare video game that Capcom did not print a lot of copies of. So
oh my god.
So if you go on eBay and look for Haunting Ground PS2, it'll run you like $500.
Okay, so emulate.
So yeah, just do what I did and emulate it. But there's a rich tradition of this in survival horror, because one of the things that survival horror, especially with like Silent Hill and Haunting Ground, part of the reason they were so influential and are still beloved to this day in the gaming sphere is because they will tackle subjects that are like not things that video games talked about. Silent Hill 2, I know Steve just recently played the remake of that. It delves into a little bit of this with the character of Maria and how she represents this sort of sexual repression, and how her sex appeal is part of James's fucked up views on sex, and how his views about sex got fucked up over the course of his wife falling ill. And I think that those are really interesting things to explore that just didn't get explored in that space, in that video game space. So when you get like a Haunting Ground or a Silent Hill or the original Clock Tower, which Haunting Ground is the spiritual successor to, that features this sort of very slasher adjacent idea of using voyeuristic cameras, using stalkers that are using phallic weapons, of this sort of almost damsel character who is pure and hot and sexy, and is this, but is at the same time this like final girl figure who has to overcome all this. And I think all of that kind of got distilled perfectly in A Haunting Ground, and that's why it's like the best female-led survival horror game ever that no one talks about because it's $500. So that would be the one I would go to as like one of my like favorite depictions of the intersection of sex and horror.
Okay. I'll go ahead and go next. So mine is a comic by Margaret Bennett, who's one of my favorite comic writers, and she did Insects. And I remember hearing about this at first just because she posted the foreword to the book online one day, and I was like, okay, well now I have to read that. And the foreword just goes into why would a woman want to write about body horror, and she just talks about how your entire life as a woman, your body is against you. Either something's wrong with it, or it's not good enough, or it's attacking you, or it's trying to kill you, or you have to engage in the most painful possible experience of your entire existence in order to prolong your own genetic material. So it's just this really, really fascinating take on that. And so she wanted to do a book just about body horror and women. And so she did Insects, Insexts. And it is about this woman who is like having an affair with her, like, essentially maid, servant, whatever. And they, like, together just, fucking kill her husband by impregnating him, and he just, like, you know, a fucking child just chest bursts its way out of him, and then they, like, try to begin just this happily ever after Victorian life together, but then just shit keeps getting more and more complicated, and they find themselves able to experience more of these powers and abilities that they've gotten by engaging in sex with each other. So the maid, the servant woman is able to, like, divine the future when she and her partner have sex. And the main character of the book gets progressively less human as the book goes on until she eventually just turns into just, like, it's kind of a butterfly, but not in, like, a cool way, and, like, really fucking terrifying monster body horror way. And it's just a good fucking time. I think she's only ever done one volume, which is kind of sad because it does leave off to be continued, but I don't know if it sold well enough or what happened. But still a really good volume in and of itself. How about you, Steve? You got a favorite intersection?
The one that comes to mind right now is an 80s movie by David Cronenberg called Videodrome that I really, really love. I watched it for the first time, I want to say like a year ago. Maybe it was like last summer, something like that. But Videodrome basically comes out in 83, and it's about this guy who runs this TV studio that's always looking for, like, edgy things to broadcast. And by edgy, it mostly just means, like, glorifications of, like, sex and violence, and usually some intersection of the two, like rape material or something like that. And one day he finds this, like, bootleg broadcast signal from some other country of, like, really intense, just, like, pornographic style sex violence happening. And he wants to keep broadcasting it. And of course, there's a lot of arguing back and forth between other people of, like, oh, you can't do that, you can't show that on TV or whatever. But the sort of, like, real meat of the story is he, at the beginning, he goes on this TV show to debate it with this woman, and they have this back and forth about puritanical sex politics and what you can and can't show, and what does it mean to really be sex positive when so much of it is kind of repressed into the household and you can't discuss it in life and all that. And then the two get together and they have this sex scene where she's into some, like, really kinky stuff, and she wants him to cut her, and then essentially she goes missing, and that's kind of the plot of the movie. But it's such a good example of the thing about horror and the body and sexuality that's so scary most of the time is that when it's not scary, it feels so good or it looks so good. And Cronenberg does such a good job throughout his whole career being the kind of guy that really thinks about not only how much we depend on our embodied existence to be who we are, but how that changes with time and what that makes us as it changes. Like when your relationship to your body changes as you get sicker, does that change who you are as a person and can you live with that? Or if that's happening to someone you love, are they still the person you love to a certain point? A little Silent Hill 2 right there. But Videodrome does such a good job of really encapsulating like this voyeuristic fascination we have with violence and sex and how it changes what our ideas of what is attractive can be, and then whether or not we can live in a reality where those kinds of things are either policed or aren't compatible with the world that you're living in. And the line really starts to blur between what you're watching and who you are. And as that happens, and as your tastes change, and as you become more and more enraptured in this world of like the perverse and the taboo, and you become something else, how does that affect you physically? And can you continue to live with that? And what happens when the thing that feels so good or looks so good starts to transform from being attractive to being really ugly? Those lines, that it's just a really, really good movie, and it's a really good encapsulation of that feeling. It's one of his best movies, I think. Like, I think it's a top 3 with him. But early on, it feels like such a hardcore erotic thriller that then just slowly transforms into this body horror story about the thing that you were so enticed by becoming the thing that you were so repulsed by, and what's causing it, and whether or not you can still maintain a relationship to it. It's so good.
Cool.
Sorry, I got plugged in computer in.
Beep.
That's ruining the audio. I switched over to the laptop tonight so that we wouldn't have the same interruptions and then the different interruptions. My battery life is shit.
Just can't win.
Anyway. Yeah, no, there is no winning. It's almost like I do Geeky Gentleman to provide the best quality audio, and I do it as a good time to hang out with my friends. But here we are. I still want the episode to be good, but that's not my main priority. No one's complained about us any of the issues thus far, so it's probably because they're not watching. That's okay. It's been a while since we've had an episode just randomly take off because people think it's the movie. So maybe things are being done right. I don't know. Yeah. All right. So we talked about like some of our favorite examples. Is there an example readily available for you that you think it was just done wrong, or it goes too much into just being like a creepy fantasy that someone's enacting out on film, as opposed or in other medium, as opposed to trying to send any other kind of message? Can you think of an example where it is just purely exploitative, just purely to get tits on screen, or show violence against someone in a sexual manner?
I would say Hatchet.
I mean, I think
I love that movie. So
Say
I
what?
would say Hatchet, but I love that movie too much. So
Oh, that one.
I mean, I think Terrifier, as far as like the big modern ones for me, is kind of that, where I just sort of feel like it doesn't understand what line in the sand it wants to draw, and the exploitative side and the self-aware side are just always constantly at war with each other. But they're not at war with each other in an interesting, compelling way. They're just kind of incoherently at war with each other. There are good ideas in those movies, I think. I mean, I think there's a weird sort of like there's a weird and interesting critique about torture and punishment being a prerequisite for having a good life in the third one. But it's just so not committed to exploring that when it could just have Art the Clown feed someone a rat through a test tube. And it doesn't work when you're bouncing between those two things all the time.
Yeah, that's fair. I would say like there's any number of just like random slashers. Like the one that's jumping to my mind is the remake of My Bloody Valentine. There's like a whole scene.
Oof.
There's like a whole scene where it's just a woman who is having sex with some guy. And she like walks out of their hotel room because he like runs off, and she like runs after him just like butt ass naked, and you just get like full frontal nudity for like several minutes, and it's like not really needed. Like it's kind of that thing I was talking about with like Cabin in the Woods, where it's just like it's being put in there because the audience expects it to be there, and we're just doing it to have tits on screen. So like I feel like there's a lot of slasher movies that do that, and I've seen so many slasher movies, and I would say that like that's the one jumping in my mind.
I think that's fair. I was just curious if there were any that like came to mind directly. I asked the question and I couldn't think of a good response answer. So but you're probably right. It is mostly just what it is probably is like the horror movie number 12 or whatever of the franchise. Like I think Freddy vs. Jason is a pretty shit film. And that has like quite a bit of just party and sex and violence and stuff, and I think he murders the shit out of the one guy on the bed, like folds the mattress in half on his ass and stuff. There's like the girls that get killed in that. It's pretty bad. There's the whole scene with Freddy trying to rip the one girl's panties off and stuff. So I think by the time you get like so far into a franchise, at some point it is just becoming a cash grab, and there's any art or like thought that could be put into it is just gone. But at the same time, I don't know. There's always the potential for it to come back, because like after it's around for so long, eventually it like comes back around, and the people that liked the first one or the first couple come into and get to control the franchise because they're just out of ideas from like the work for hire guys. So it gets to be an interesting little round and round we go. But I don't know, I find it fascinating. The joke I've said for years and years is, for some reason, porno and horror movies all get a billion sequels, and their quality eventually becomes just exactly the same. It's a less relevant point now that we just have videos on the internet, but they're all like the classic titles of like Butt Sluts 12 or whatever, and just I've always appreciated that joke.
There's a fine line, as we've proven today, between the porno and the horror movie.
Indeed.
I mean, there really is. Like, I think it was the guy that did Piranha 3D talked about this. He was like, so if you want nudity on film, you either have to get actresses from porn, or you have to get actresses from Europe, and actresses from porn are a lot cheaper. It's essentially the dynamic, he said, of like why he'd hired so many adult film stars to be in Piranha 3D.
Yeah, that tracks.
So I'm gonna leave it at that one's probably more exploitative, but here we are. Poor James Cameron having to fight with the guy that did Piranha 3D about how he's destroying the format of 3D film.
Dang.
Oh. So anyway, well, I think that covers a lot of the bases I wanted to talk about with this one. I was just curious, something that obviously it's a dynamic that's put around a lot. It probably has something to do with the nature of those like extremely heightened emotions. And I guess the only other thing we didn't talk about that I don't really have the energy to anymore is just why is it that going to see a horror movie is like the, oh yeah, we're gonna fuck tonight kind of date. But that's neither here nor there. I'll let everyone else sit there and mull over their their exact reasonings for these type of things.
Answer in the comments below.
Yeah, answer in the comments below. What? Oh, here's a good one for the comments. Legitimate good question for the comments. What's the sex in a horror movie scene that like neuron activated for you? That's what I want to know. What's that? I hope this doesn't awaken anything in me. All right. So that will do it for this Halloween special. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy your most wonderful holiday of the year. And we'll see you next year for another episode of Ghouly Gentlemen. Until then, I'm the philosopher.
I'm murdering people with axes.
Yeah, I'm the the horror erotic. I feel like I've been saying that for the past like 4 episodes. I feel like people get the point at this juncture.
Oh shit, Matt, you didn't tell us why you want to fuck Pyramid Head.
Big dick.
Yeah, fair enough.
And we are your Ghouly Gentlemen. And we will be dissecting.
Ha 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 ha!